Welcome to Seek Justice, a podcast that takes a deep dive into the nuances of criminal justice. Good morning to you, Dennis.
Good morning, Eric.
We happen to be recording this the day after the third Democratic debate. I was not able to stay up to watch it, but I have seen some clips here and there. And seems like not a lot changed is the general consensus. But there was one, we're going to talk about Elizabeth Warren today, but there was one classic Biden gaffe that was actually about criminal justice. I don't know if you caught this. He uttered the sentence, "No one should be in jail for nonviolent crime."
Nobody should be in jail for a nonviolent crime.
It's like, who are you, Bernie Sanders?
And I think it was Stephen Colbert that had showed this clip, and he immediately put on his Trump impression and pretended to be Trump, like saying, "Yeah, none of my crimes are violent."
Right.
So,
well, I was struck by it's a bit contentious, the fights over the details. The several of the candidates are clear about espousing agreement amongst them. I thought Beto O'Rourke did an outstanding job of speaking very passionately and well about that particular issue. He did go into great depth and passion based on the El Paso killings of not just
the issue you're talking about is gun control.
Gun control,
yeah.
Reducing sales, but a buyback program and confiscation.
Right.
And he was interviewed afterwards about it, and he's got a T-shirt out that says. It says, repeats again and again and again, "This is fucking wrong. This is fucking wrong. This is fucking wrong. This is fucking wrong." And just,
right.
And he's making it his issue. And it's almost as if this is his issue. He was so agreeable to the other candidates. I kind of had the suspicion that he's kind of figuring out that he's not going to be the president of the United States. And, the other candidate who does a really good job at that, collaborative kind of thinking, and we're all the same party and all the same mind, is Cory Booker, who
right.
I want to examine his CJ policies as well. But here's the thing I wanted to mention to you that I would love to see, and how it would make an astounding impact if it were held true, is that if all these candidates, there's 10 of them, you could do it now, is to all join hands and raise their hands together and say, look, one way or the other, all of us, each of us, are going to be working together in the new administration.
Nice.
One of us will be president. One of us will be vice president. One of us may be attorney general. One of us may be the head of Health and Human Services. One of us may be this. One of us may be that. One of us may be in charge of the Fed.
Wow.
Right? If they did that and said, we'll work all that out, but know this, the Democrats are taking over. We are the new wave of Democrats taking over. And the fact is that wouldn't be overpromising much, because that kind of stuff happens all the time.
Right.
It's one of the things that the parties do after the election is say, wow, Trump did it to a certain extent. Who was it? Carson, who was a former presidential candidate, become head of Health and Human Services. And not that he was a particularly good candidate, nor was he a particularly good head of Health and Human Services. The notion is still there.
Right.
And I think that when we examine these criminal justice reforms, we do see some similarities. We do see some redundancy across candidates, but there's some pretty big differences.
Well, and what you just described sounds a lot like what we have over here in Europe with the parliamentary system, where you vote for the party, and then amongst themselves, the party chooses who's going to be the president, who's going to be the secretary of this or the minister of that or whatever. That makes a lot of sense. That had never occurred to me to say, like, look, you're voting for us as a team.
Well, and to take that, if you will, that European approach, but acknowledge the fact that we have some differences, but we each also have some expertise, and that expertise is different.
Right. And
Castro may be better at health and human services. He may be better at Latinx issues, et cetera, et cetera. Can you imagine an administration where, you've got a Kamala Harris as Attorney General of the United States, for example? Right. What a powerful post. Not to minimize the fact that she's exceptionally strong candidate. I think she hasn't caught on yet. Her name recognition is still quite low, unlike the others who may have already peaked with some of their percentages. because everybody knows who Elizabeth Warren is. Everybody knows who Joe Biden is. So their numbers are going to be high. Not everybody knows who she is. So she has actually more room to climb. But anyways, we look at these policies candidate to candidate. I think we can kind of keep that in mind and think about that.
Yeah. All right. So with that, let's jump into Elizabeth Warren's version of the document that we went over with Sanders, titled "Rethinking Public Safety to Reduce Mass Incarceration and Strengthen Communities." Good title.
Yeah. And then subtext: my plan for comprehensive criminal justice reform. I mean, similar to Bernie, she's got a good intro here, and lots of citations. Now we will be comparing this to Bernie's, and if we recall some of the criticisms, right? There was one,
right?
But here they're like everywhere.
Nice.
And it is so better planned in the essence of it, because it proposes evidence-based approaches, but it lays out, we spend billions propping up an entire industry that profits from mass incarceration, and we do all this despite of little evidence, she says. Now, this is in the opening. In that sentence, there are 3 citations that right. When you double-click on them, you get to the facts of the matter. And I think this is exceptionally important for informed voters, particularly, I think, for millennials, who are going to have more of a tendency to want to know a little bit more about, things other than just these proclamations. And so she's got a really nice intro here with those citations, much better than Bernie's in that regard. And then she has this opening salvo that I really like. Real reform requires examining every step of the system, from what we choose to criminalize, to how law enforcement and prosecutors engage with communities and the accused, to how long people keep behind bars, how we treat them when they're there, and how we reintegrate them when they return. So one of the things that she's good at, and you'll see this, is that she wants examinations. She wants commissions and studies, because she knows, and she says this, that we have a fight on our hands. She does overpromise some, but it's not like at Bernie overpromised almost at every step. He did have a string of executive orders and whatnot, but we'll see as we go through this that her language is different. And I think that this is the first important thing here, is that she's very clear about the need for additional research. And I've heard her say this in debates and on the stump. And then, of course, she says she wants to be bold, and she gives examples of what public safety means. These are values, et cetera. And then she launches into what her plan is. And unlike Bernie, there's a lot of planning here. There is a lot of planning here. So she begins with rethinking our approach to public safety, break the school to prison pipeline. She gives good facts here. She gives the value that every child should have the opportunity to receive the support they need. And then she starts launching into what she will actually do. I will equip schools with resources to meet their students' needs by providing access to health care. And this is something we see throughout. It's not terribly unlike what Bernie did, but she is suggesting that one of her, if not her benchmark program of Medicare for All, has ramifications in this justice system. So rather here than proposing something completely new, she's saying, look, when I do that, this will happen. And that's smart. I think Bernie did that to a lesser degree than she did. We could compare notes, but that's a good start there. And she launches into decriminalizing truancy and requiring, here's an example of an action she can take. We require that any police department receiving federal funds provide mandatory training in the scientific and psychological roots of discrimination, youth development, and de-escalation tactics to officers assigned to school campuses.
Very good.
So here's a thing she can do. She's got it within her power to do it. She's got the federal bureaucracy. And then she gives an example next of rescinding an executive order that allowed school districts to participate in military-grade weapons acquisition. And then the third, she says, I'll fund the Office of Civil Rights of the Department of Education so that it can investigate school districts with dramatic disparities in school disciplinary actions. And so she's got ideas here on what she will actually do. Now, the dollar signs are going to be coming fast and furious here.
Sure.
And that's going to be a repetitious thing. But right off the bat here, I think that unlike Bernie, she's not just putting out a list of promises. She's talking about how she can meet some of those promises. And we'll see in other cases, she is talking about it being a fight rather than an edict from her.
Yes, I like that realism.
It's much more realistic. She wants to reduce homelessness and housing insecurity. Now, she wants to reduce homelessness.
Not
we
eliminated.
We can go back and look at Bernie. I'm pretty sure it was eliminated, right?
Right.
And then she's got a housing plan that when you click on it, go to it. She wants to invest $500 billion over 10 years. Wow, that's a lot of money. Creating 3.2 million new housing units and bringing down rental costs by 10%. So she's got some data there about her realistic expectations, see?
Yes.
Substantially improving housing affordability isn't just good for the economy and working families. It will also reduce homelessness and crime. So she does a smart thing, and she talks about the things she wants to do over there and how it will help things over here.
Yeah, and as I recall, Bernie's plan was we will provide housing to everyone that needs it.
That's right.
And it was just like it wasn't we're going to increment this by this percentage or decrement this by this percentage.
Right.
This is much more understanding that the world is gray and not so black and white.
Yes. And so when we look at the next one, that point's driven home particularly. She wants to invest in evidence-based interruption programs. She looks at model cities that can have demonstrated homicide and gun violence rates have been reduced through community partnerships. She has a link to what happened in Boston, what happened in Oakland, what happened in Chicago. She's got data on focused deterrence. She's got data links on cost effectiveness and multiplier effects. And this is what she says she will do. And this is the first one in here.
Wait.
My administration will invest in piloting similar programs at scale.
Ooh, I like the sound of that. I have a quick question. I don't have any evidence on this interruption, but what are evidence-based interruption programs?
They stop the cycle of violence and divert criminal behavior by working within the communities where there are a lot of violence, and
Right.
they put teams of people there, many times folks who've been engaged in the system who are recovered or recovering addicts, et cetera, and get very focused on neighborhoods and who is there and who people trust. And and the links are good. This is good stuff. But
Right.
but again, here's the thing. Not only investing in pilot programs, but she uses this term, which for most folks is going to escape them, so to speak.
At scale.
She wants to, at scale.
Yeah, that jumped out at me as well. Yeah.
Statewide, or beyond the city, regionally, et cetera. And I think there's links here to get into more details here for her.
Okay.
Next up is decriminalizing mental health crisis. And interesting point here that she makes. Police officers have become America's de facto first mental health providers.
Wow.
And I don't remember Bernie being quite as clear about that. But one thing I like about Warren, and I've heard her do this all the time, she talks to people. And as she was raised lower class, climbing to middle class, and working herself out of not abject poverty, but economic difficulty, she's much more grounded, I think, in the way that she looks at things and in her experience. Here, again, as you would expect, she refers to her Medicare to all, for all, provide continuous access to mental health care services. And if her very expensive, very far-reaching, probably a little bit too exuberant approach that she's fighting for happens, then these things would take place. But here she says this: she'll increase funding for co-responder initiatives that connect law enforcement to mental health care providers and experts, and my administration will pilot evidence-based crisis response efforts to provide needed services. And then she links to pilot programs.
Nice.
She is much more of a scientist, or takes more of a scientific approach than what we've seen in Bernie's, which is just way over promising. And in a couple places here, I've got some direct links with what Bernie had said. Uh-huh. So she goes on. She wants to invest in diversion programs for substance abuse. So again, the language. She wants to invest in diversion programs.
Not totally fix everything.
She's not going to eliminate
right.
People with substance abuse being in prison. She's not going to end it. She's going to invest in. She'll support evidence-based safe injection sites and needle exchanges, expand the availability of buprenorphine approaches to prevent overdoses. And in her CARE Act, she wants to invest $100 billion. Now, similar to Bernie, this is very, very expensive, and we don't know, and we won't know here how she expects to pay for it, except that, without a doubt, she's going to raise taxes. She tries to establish herself different from Bernie by saying she's a capitalist, and she does talk here about taxing corporations, but you can tax corporations 2-3%, which is, I don't know, perhaps somewhat realistic. It's not enough money to pay for all this stuff. It certainly is not enough. So continuing, she wants to change what we choose to criminalize, and she begins here and she says something that Bernie never said. But from the Senate on down, elected lawmakers have an obligation to do better than what we have now. Here's where we can start. So she's talking about the legislative process. She's talking about where she's going to start. She doesn't talk about it in terribly unrealistic terms. And then she says the fight begins. She's going to repeal the 1994 crime bill. She links it to exacerbated incarceration rates as a result of that crime bill. And she says we need to change the law. And she has established here a bit that she knows she's got a fight in her hand.
So out of curiosity, I did a search for how many times the word evidence appears in this document, and it appears 15 times. And then I went to go do a search on Bernie's, and it appeared once.
Well, and I'm glad you did that. That is what my feeling was. I didn't know if the data was there to support it. And
Bernie's document has changed a lot since we did that episode last week. It's been reformatted, and a lot of the same stuff is still there, but I don't know, he got rid of that empty bullet point. But anyway, it looks like someone has actually examined that, probably as a direct result of listening to Seek Justice.
Without a doubt. I mean, certainly. So back to Warren. She wants to address the legacy of the war on drugs. She's got some good information there. She's got a link to information how it's been harmful to communities of color. She's got a link toward legalizing marijuana. And eliminating the remaining disparity between crack and powder cocaine. This points to the fact that she knows we've already done that. I think in Bernie's document, I made the mention that he acts like we haven't been working that. Our friend and colleague Mark Maurer from the Sentencing Project led that charge nationally. He did and had some great results from the work that he did all across the country. She recognizes that. And then she talks about expanding options that divert people into treatment programs. Doesn't say it here. I don't know why she should be referring back to her Medicare for All. That's how that would be paid for. She isn't limiting that in other places. She wants to stop criminalizing homelessness. She's got, in one paragraph, she's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different links about the data on homelessness, the behavior that we punish, that's associated with homelessness, like sleeping in public or living in vehicles, and then the data's there. So rather than treating the homeless like criminals, we should get them the resources they need. It's here again in this list of things here, she doesn't really get very clear about how she's going to do that other than just spend a bunch of more money. Now, this next section is interesting. It's about stopping the criminalization of poverty. Got links to the impacts of fines and fees on low-income people. Right. Links to research on criminalizing poverty. Just all sorts of data here, which is just, fabulous to see. She spent a lot of staff time to get this stuff right. And this is how she intros to the following list. As president, I will fight to. Bingo. She acknowledges she's got to fight. Back up in the beginning of this whole section, she talks about from the Senate on down. As a senator herself, she certainly knows what she's up against. And because she says she will fight for it, she doesn't suffer, as Bernie does, from this burdensome set of promises of what he will do, and I like that. Yeah, we talked about that. We talked about that last episode where Bernie keeps saying, "As president, I will," or "As president, Bernie will," and I think I suggested something like, "I will try to," or something like that. But she's got it exactly right. Fight is the right verb to use in that sentence. And she is a fighter. She comes across as a fighter. She's fiery. In the debates last night, one of the things I turned to my wife after Bernie was just absolutely ranting, as he does, and I agree with what he's saying. But he's almost unhinged. And I said to her, "Do you think when he goes out for dinner he talks that way to his wife?" I mean, he doesn't seem to modulate at all. What are you going to order? You pick something off the menu. Yeah. So she comes across much more reasonably at the same time as a fighter. Right. And I think she comes across as tough as nails. So here on this list, she wants to end cash bail, allow people to return to their jobs and families, reserving preventive detention only for those cases. And remember, this is what she's fighting for. By opening this section up with that, she doesn't have to give a whole lot of details. She's already said, carte blanche, I'm going to fight to get these things done,
right?
Most through legislation. And then in some cases here, she talks about what she'll do as executive. Restrict fines and fees levied before adjudication. Again, good citation of what the issue is here. She'll reverse the Trump administration's policy, expanding pretrial civil forfeiture at the federal level, and restrict the use of civil forfeiture overall. Something she can do. And if you aren't clear, as you weren't, when Bernie talked about civil forfeiture, there's a link here to his policy. So you can, with a click, you can find out exactly what she's talking about.
Right.
She wants to cap the assessment of fines and fees. Here she says, states should also eliminate the profit incentive that drives excessive fees, et cetera. Now, this is an example, again, different from Bernie, where Bernie, I said again and again and again, he doesn't differentiate between what he can do at the executive level, what he can do at the federal level through executive order or legislation. And I kept saying, it's a state issue, Bernie. It's a state issue, Bernie. Here she says it's a state issue.
Right.
And she says she'll fight for that. And so how will she fight for that? Not exactly clear, but it's not an overpromise to say that she'll fight for it. She wants to eliminate fees for necessary services. She talks about private companies. She's hell-bent, as Bernie is, on reducing private company profit. And then she goes to references her plan to end private prisons. Now, when you go to her link there to end private prisons, you have a similar plan.
Right.
And she, for example, she's going to shut down the use of federal private detention facilities, end all contracts with Bureau of Prisons, ICE, and the U.S. Marshal Service who have private detention providers. I will extend these bans to states and localities by conditioning their receipt of federal public safety funding on their use of public facilities. Very explicit things within her power. Talks further in there about prohibiting contractors, and then links to details of how they overcharge in commissary and package services. And she says, I'll prohibit companies from charging fees for reentry supervision, probation services, et cetera. Now, again, big money there, real big money there, because there's an awful lot of revenue that is produced from getting that done. Right. And then further on that, then I'll go back to her full plan, is that it's a good example here. I will put in place an independent prison conditions monitor within the Department of Justice's Office of the Inspector General. Now, something she can do, although the same criticism that I levied with Sanders is expanding federal government, which he did and says he will do a lot more than she does.
Right.
But this is an example of that. And so it's just smart for her to have several plans, not put it all in one place. And then when you link to that, she wants to address the issue of accountability for the wealthy and the well-connected. She's proposed new criminal negligence standard for executives of corporations. There's a link to that. She's proposed new certification requirements. There's a link to that for executives at giant financial institutions, so we can hold them criminally accountable if the banks they oversee commit fraud. So again, very heavy on details and planning, which she's pretty well known for.
Right, exactly.
Reform how the law is enforced. Again, comprehensive review. We must critically examine each aspect of the law enforcement process to ensure it's both just and consistent with public safety. And later she talks a little bit about how she'll do that. She wants law enforcement reform. She wants things to fundamentally change. She wants funding that works, replacing failed policies with effective evidence-based practices. And then she says, here's how we'll do it. Improve access to treatment and intervention. She'll invest in mental and emotional health support and expand promising pilots like peer intervention and early warning programs. There's a link to peer intervention programs. There's a link to early warning programs. You want to understand what these pilots are, what they cost, et cetera. You can go there and you could start to put a price tag on this stuff, right?
As well as she addresses the number of suicides going up, which
yes,
clearly she listened to our episode on that.
Clearly she's there. We will have contact with her team as a result of this. I really think that there's some good stuff here. We should congratulate them on that. Here's a section that I didn't see in Bernie's, and it's here. She wants to improve data collection and reporting. Her Justice Department, this is what she can do. Establish a rigorous and systematic process to collect the data that's missing, because there's no comprehensive database in shootings, ethics, misconduct, complaints, et cetera. Provide relevant data collection training to law enforcement and make data publicly available whenever possible. It's just this language
so reasonable. Exactly. Yeah.
And then use the data to prioritize federal oversight and hold police accountable, et cetera. We'll work with interested departments to use their own data to improve their legitimacy in the communities they serve and inform more just and effective policing. Very smart.
Beautiful.
Pilot. Increase federal oversight capacity, reverse the Sessions guidance limiting the use of consent decrees. She's got a link to Trump administration not initiating any investigations for investigating police departments. She's got data going back to that. She wants to empower state attorneys general. I'll incentivize states to empower their attorneys general to conduct their own oversight of police behavior nationwide. This was the issue with Bernie, that he was going to do this. It sounded like he was going to do it at the federal level, and she says no.
Yep.
I'm going to work with the people that are empowered to do that. She's going to incentivize. How will she do that? It's going to be using funding, et cetera, et cetera. And here's another positive evidence-based approach. She wants to demand increased civilian oversight. She will expand local oversight and democratic engagement in police and implement a competitive grant program that provides funding to communities that establish an independent civilian oversight mechanism for the police department. This is, I'm being redundant now, but this is just realistic stuff. And as I scroll through this, we see this again and again. She wants to establish a federal standard for the use of force. She says what she'll do at the federal level to prohibit permissive pursuit policies that result in collateral damage. Then she links to it. I will work with local law enforcement agencies to ensure training and technology employed at the federal level can be implemented at all levels of government. See?
Nice.
Just smart stuff. Increase federal funding for law enforcement. Here she talks about incentives again. Restrict qualified immunity to hold police officers accountable. I support limited qualified immunity for law enforcement officials who are found to have violated the Constitution and allowing victims to sue police departments. Not very clear how she will do that, but remember in the beginning of this, she said, this is what I'm going to fight for.
Right.
So she could fight and fight and fight and then say, I fought and fought and fought, and a lot of the stuff I wanted to happen didn't happen.
Yep.
I'm going to continue to fight for it. Some of the stuff did happen. It's just smart. I'll end racially discriminatory policing. I'll end stop and frisk by directing the Justice Department to withhold federal funding from law enforcement agencies that continue to deploy it in similar practice, and I'll work with Congress to pass legislation, and then she links to the legislation.
So all the complaints we had about Bernie, about how you're going to do it, Bernie,
Yep.
she lays it out and says, well, this is how.
Separate law enforcement from immigration enforcement. She links her immigration plan. I haven't taken the time to go there, but I'm sure it's similar to other plans. Lots of citations, lots of evidence, lots of tie-in with federal funding, et cetera. Demilitarize local law enforcement. She already mentioned she'll end the 1033 program, which allows them to buy military arming. Expand the responsible use of body cameras and protect citizen privacy. And this is where I want to make a huge distinction with Bernie. This is what Warren says. The federal government should expand funding for body cameras and ensure consistent and responsible camera use. And then she links to policies. I'll establish a task force on digital privacy to establish guardrails and appropriate privacy protections for this and other surveillance technology. Well, Bernie said he was going to ban it, including the use of facial recognition.
Yep.
She wants to examine it. She wants guardrails. She wants protections and algorithms that exacerbate underlying bias. That's what Bernie said he was going to ban, was validated actuarial risk and need assessment tools. She doesn't get that specific, but she does mention here the algorithms that exacerbate underlying bias. Here she's going to use a task force to dig into that. That's smart.
Well,
that's very, very smart.
Bernie specifically said he was going to ban the facial recognition tech.
Well, and he also said he was going to ban the use of these. She calls them algorithms. They use algorithms. Yeah. And they're much more than that, by the way. And neither one of them. She doesn't. I wish there was a link there to get into that detail. I talked with a company executive who had research against his products, the Compass Risk and Need Assessment Tool, that he debunked, and he tried to get his stuff published, and he could not catch up. He won't catch up. Nobody's publicizing that he debunked the methodology.
Right.
But that's where a link could be helpful here. So if she or her staff are listening, they might want to get into that a little bit. Again, reduce gun violence. There's a lot of talk about this last night. She does a smart thing here, and she links it to making it more difficult for the police to do their jobs, and then she links to that data. And then she says she has a plan to goal of reducing by 80% the number of people who died. 40,000 in 2017 died from guns in the United States. And Cory Booker last night made a point that was pretty astounding. He said, look, more people have died from gun carnage over a certain period of time that have been killed in all the wars. These are the kinds of data that we should see here. To really kind of, just get in your face with an explosion of reality here. And then it links to her gun control plan, which I haven't gone to it. I've heard a little bit about it. I'm sure when we went to it, we'd see similar types display of linkage to citations and pilot approaches, et cetera. She's got a whole section here on prosecutorial and judicial reform, a reasonable introduction to it. And then she says, here's what she says that you won't see anywhere in Bernie's document. Here's how we can start. Right?
Yep.
It's the beginning point. I'll fund federal public defenders and expand targeted grant funding for public defenders at the state level. Remember when we talk about Bernie's, there wasn't any plan for that. He just was going to do it. Well, here she gives a little bit more detail. She'll reopen, expand Department of Justice's Office for Access to Justice, which work with state and local governments to expand access to counsel. Very specific. Go to the link.
Yep.
It's very specific, right? Rein in prosecutorial abuses. She'll support a set of reforms. Establish a commission on prosecutorial conduct to make recommendations for best practices and monitor adoption of these recommendations, and create an independent prosecutorial integrity unit to hold accountable prosecutors who abuse their power. Again, specific stuff, using citizens to examine, recommend, and move on it. She wants to expand access to justice for people wrongfully imprisoned, repeal overly restrictive habeas rules, make it harder for courts to dismiss these claims. Again, this is stuff she's willing to fight for. She wants to fight to protect the rights of survivors, to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act, and provide full funding to eliminate the rape kit backlog. So some specifics there. Appointing a diverse judicial bench, appointing a slate of judges, including those who have background defending civil liberties or as public defenders. We talked in some prior episodes about how much easier it is for judges to become judges who are prosecutors rather than public defenders.
Right, exactly.
She's acknowledging that, doing something about it. Very good. Something you didn't see in Bernie's. I love this. She wants to take into account the views of those people most impacted by the system. As president, I will establish an advisory board comprised of survivors of violence, along with formerly incarcerated individuals. I'll consult with this advisory board and listen.
Listen.
Very, very good. Kind of rushing through this a bit. Reforming incarceration. She's got some good data there, some good links. She wants to reduce mandatory minimums. She's very clear here. They have been proven effective. In one paragraph, she's got 3 different links to different sets of data. She wants to fight to have Congress reduce or eliminate these provisions. She's very clear here that she's got to work with Congress. She'll reverse the Sessions memo that requires federal prosecutors to seek the most severe possible penalties and allow federal prosecutors discretion. Things she can do at the sweep of a pen.
Yep.
Raise the age for criminal liability. She's got data here about that you put in your show notes from the
previous episode. Yep.
The previous episode.
I will also include that same information in the show notes for this one at seekjustice.fm/020.
And links here as well that what states have done to raise the age, which was what you had done. You had to do that research as a result of reading Bernie's plan because Bernie didn't provide it here. It's right there.
Yep. So this has been quite a bit to take in. I think we might need to divide this up into 2 episodes like we did with old Bernie. So With that, we will start next time about where we left off in the documents today.
Yeah, we'll take a look at the death penalty, what she wants to do to work with states, reforming reentry, topics near and dear to our heart. We should let's dedicate the whole next episode to that. So I'll see you then.
All right. Great, Dennis. See you next week. Thank you for listening. If you like what you've just heard, you can support us by telling a friend or sharing us on social media. All of our episodes can be found on our website, seekjustice.fm. If you'd like to get in touch with us, we can be reached at seekjusticefm@gmail.com or via our Twitter account @seekjusticefm. See you next week.